Hey there, this is an evergreen episode of Sustain What featuring Pat Bagley and Karen Romano Young, two very different artists using different techniques and pushing different audiences toward sustainable outcomes in society or the environment. It's definitely as relevant as ever.
This is the Thriving Online track of our Sustain What webcast here at Columbia University's Earth Institute, where I'm building an initiative on communication and sustainability. The main goal is to make information matter. So the Monday sessions, Thriving Online, are about sort of spreading skills, spreading and sharing skills, and refining them for using different methods to make information matter. Sometimes that involves artwork. Actually, the very first episode of this Thriving Online version of our webcast got into an interesting intersection where Craig Spencer, an emergency room physician at Columbia, had done a harrowing journal on Twitter and then for the Washington Post on his COVID-19 experiences. And I'm just showing you right now a little bit of how that played out when Al Jazeera Plus, AJ Plus, a journalist and visual communicator, Isabeau Doucet, connected with him, and they turned his diary essentially into a vivid novelization. And so this is a running theme. Essentially, you can see here that's a pretty dark and impactful meshing of art and story, and that ended up in multiple translations around the world, millions of views. I mean, his story already had shaken folks, and it really drew attention to what is really an invisible problem. So much of what was happening with COVID-19 was happening in ICUs and places where the media can't go and where pictures can't be taken. So today, a very different iteration of this. Really a pleasure to bring together two very distinct types of visual communicators. They're both draw as part of their profession. We have Karen Romano Young, who you may know from her Doodlebug, KRY Twitter account, or from Antarctic Log, hashtag Antarctic Log. Karen has gone down in Alvin, the deep sea submersible. She's been out on Antarctic expeditions and always is bringing a pen and pad and paper and whatever. She's going to talk about doodlebugging. I guess, is that a verb? We'll find out in a second. And Pat Bagley at the Salt Lake City Tribune newspaper, who is, from what I could see, you're the longest, I won't say longest living, you're the longest serving professional editorial cartoonist, 1979 onward, fully employed through that stretch. And, you know, we're in a time where so many journalists and communicators are struggling to find a sustainable way to be employed. Bravo to that. And the National Cartoonist Society just named you this year's Editorial Cartoonist of the Year, which is a pretty awesome thing. And I got connected with you through the Society of Environmental Journalists. Last week, we had a spectacular closing session to their 30th annual meeting that involved the arts. You can both unmute at this point if you would like to, and we can get into a conversation. It's just wonderful to connect with you both, Karen and Pat. And I thought we'd start with Karen. If you could just sort of give a little bit of your journey to this place you're in now, where it's unremarkable to have dived to the seabed and spent weeks on ships in the middle of the Antarctic in the Southern Ocean, which is not a fun place. I've been in tropical oceans and it can get cold and weird, but being toward Antarctica is a whole nother thing. So how are you doing, and why are you doing what you're doing?
First of all, thank you for having me, and I am honored to be here with Pat. I am a beginner, really, in cartooning or in science comics. And I'm really pleased that you shared Craig Spencer's work, because I think it's just stunning and gorgeous. And it's one of the things that made me just look at this and say, what makes this so moving in the format that it's in? I got going on comics with a book. I'm a children's book author, and I did a different sort of novel called Doodlebug, about a girl who discovers that drawing, she's got attention issues in school, and she discovers that if she draws, she can sit still and pay attention. And this is kind of my life to a degree, although I don't think I realized what was happening when I was a kid. And I had just published Doodlebug when I had the opportunity to go into the Arctic on a big Coast Guard cutter, the Healy, and explore the Arctic. I was in a journalism berth and I was blogging for a couple different places. And a story came to me from one of the native observers from the Inupiat community who was aboard the ship. And he was telling me about what was happening to walrus as they were dealing with climate change and the reduced ice and how they were stranding. And he described a stampede on the beach. And I wanted to tell this story. And I really struggled with it. Every time I put pen on paper, it just was so grim. I thought, how would anyone want to read this? But then I thought, well, part of the charm with walrus is part of what makes us care about them is that they're so funny looking. So I tried drawing them. I just pulled a sheet of paper out of the recycling bin and drew with whatever pens I happened to have and said to whoever was sitting next to me, do you think, what do you think? And they said, yeah, make that your blog post. And I was surprised at the response because it got shared a lot. And I thought, okay, there's something going on here I'm not really sure of. But when I got back on dry land, I kept on going with science comics. And I've developed now a couple different series. One was in print in a children's magazine. And the other is Antarctic Log, which you mentioned. And that started when I was invited to go to Antarctica by the National Science Foundation under an Antarctic Artist and Writers Grant. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? And the very first thing that had to happen for that was that I had to physically qualify. So I went to get a blood test, and the person who was drawing my blood asked me whether the Antarctic was warming because of the ozone hole, and was the heat getting in through that. Well, we chuckle, but it was actually fairly, that's logical. It's a logical thought. And this was, an educated person. And I thought, okay, that's what I need to talk about is some of these misconceptions and storylines that people have. So I started with that one, and it keeps on going weekly ever since. It's included 2 different trips to Antarctica with groups of scientists that were doing different research efforts, and a lot of other science outreach from that point on. Most recently, I've started a new comic series that's really in its nascent stages that is called I Was a Kid, and focuses on the paths that different scientists or people who are in the sciences, in any sort of role, and how they get to do what they're doing.
And you also, I noticed online there was a one explanatory video about doodle bugging, I would call it. Keeping a journal, keeping a field journal, or the like. Can you just talk briefly about that aspect of, like, how this can be something even someone might be intimidated about? I'm not an artist, but might still find a way to do this.
Well, the idea behind Doodlebug was to tell a story at the same time as writing about it. So sometimes you're drawing a picture and people are, there are speech bubbles. Sometimes if I'm talking about a trip up the coast of California, there's a little bit of a map. Lots of little doodling. And the secret to Doodlebug, and you're showing the first page of the book Doodlebug. This was actually done in my sketchbook, and then basically we scanned it, and this is what the book looks like. There's, there it is. And symbols for different people. The triangle is the little sister, and the square is Doodlebug, our hero. It's interesting because when you stop and draw in the middle of writing, your mind keeps on kind of telling the story. And when you come back to the end of the story, you know what to do next. And lots of times when I talk to kids about this book, I will say, if you see a really elaborate doodle, you'll know that I didn't know what came next in the story. That I was drawing, the whole word Sunday with the sun coming out of it because I didn't know what was going to happen on Sunday until I got to the end of the drawing.
So anticipatory, like leaving space and stuff.
Yeah.
Not just filling as. that strikes me as something that's really hard to think about when you're scribbling. This is cool. And is this a? Are there ways? Well, I guess this YouTube video would be something that someone could look at. But have you done more of an instructional book or tutorial yet?
I have done some tutorials. You've got one of the YouTube things. I just did a mini course during the summer for the International Ocean Drilling Program, which is Discovery Program, pardon me, which is associated with Columbia and Lamont, and really talk to people about why comics can be important in science communications, and also not just reading it, but also turn around and tell your own science stories this way for kids and teachers. I've done workshops as part of the National Writing Project, showing teachers how to use this in the classroom.
It's fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm hoping that this conversation we're having today can propagate and lead others to think about this too. There has to be a way to spread this. And I know I've seen also someone else out there, I was Googling around trying to find them, has focused on sort of botanical or scientific journals, as a scientist, how to keep a quasi-serious version of one of these as well. Do you know who I'm thinking of, or is there who else is in this arena?
A nature journal, and I'm struggling to find to think of the name of the author, but my first nature journal, and there are a lot of people who are doing it. It's something that scientists do. Scientists, if they sit down to talk to you, pull out a napkin and draw what they're talking about all the time, and that stuff goes into their science journal. It's interesting that a lot of the first explorations to Antarctica, and Darwin had an artist along. A lot of people going on expeditions took artists along to show what they were doing, and to show what they were seeing. Yeah,
and that also gives you your authenticity for your data, the metadata, as they call it. If you have that all scribbled down, it gives you a sense of here's the primary source for the observation I made. That's really cool. So let me just switch.
By the way, I just got to say that doing what you're doing with the pen and paper, where you just can't go back and erase, it's a high wire act, and you do it so wonderfully. I'm really impressed. It's amazing.
Thanks.
Well, that's a good segue to our editorial cartooning, which I think it's too facile to call it political cartooning, because not every editorial cartoon is about politics. But Pat, how did your journey start? And I'm going to ask Karen to circle back to her childhood too. But Pat, how did this become your niche for communicating with folks?
So I went to school at BYU, Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. And I was taking a class. It was one of those classes that is supposed to be good for you, that you're going to use in later life. And it was personal finance, but it was just deadly dull. And I remember doodling, as one does, in my class notes. And there was a subject that was then current at BYU. And also I started drawing a cartoon. And it's not this cartoon on screen, but I did this.
No, I'm just showing you some of your work. Yeah.
This cartoon in my class notes. And I thought, there was a full-blown editorial cartoon. I thought, I will take this to the Daily Universe, which is the paper at BYU, and maybe they can have their cartoonist do a finished copy of this. So I took it there, and the editor looked at it and he goes, "This is pretty good. We're actually dealing with the subject." So they had me do a finished copy of that cartoon, and the next day, you see your stuff in print, and it's addictive, man. Yeah. That's what you want to do after seeing that for the first time. There's another part to the story. They hired me for the summer because their cartoons was going to be gone for the summer. And I was working at a graphics department at BYU, and the secretary said, "Congratulations on getting your cartoon in Newsweek." And
wow.
I said, "What are you talking about?" And it was that very first cartoon that I ever did. It actually made it into Newsweek.
That's amazing.
Who knows? So, but I like to tell people, you never know what's going to happen. Take chances. Get out of your comfort zone. Yeah.
And hold on, let me just switch back here. So And then political cartooning is its own animal. I could show in a few minutes. I'll go to Twitter and show some of your stuff that you post there too. That requires another level of courage. So in other words, you have the courage to just say, I'm going to do my drawings and put them in a public arena, and they're going to have meaning. But then to take on tough subjects, fracking or a particular president, whatever. That can you describe the journey into that arena at the paper and onward?
Well, I'm working at the Salt Lake Tribune. I've been there for 40 years, which actually 41 coming up here pretty quick.
Amazing.
But I'm working for a newspaper which was established as a counterweight to the LDS Church in the Intermountain West. And so it's always been a little bit left of center. And so I've been doing this for 40 years, and I've been doing it for so long that, even the conservatives here think it's my calling. I think this is what I was put here to annoy them. And so I don't get a whole lot of pushback, but occasionally I do get that letter where you got to kind of worry about what their intention is. I mean, and especially now, things are
threatening feedback.
Yeah. And it's getting worse. I got to say, it's getting worse.
Yeah. I experienced some of that. Well, anyone who's in the media, or especially on social media.
Or in science. Anybody who's in science is going to be...
Oh, well, right. Yeah, no, now we're getting back to the public scientists. One thing that we've talked about here a lot is we recently did a session on how to navigate online harassment for scientists. And there are people, the organization PEN America, which represents journalists and authors mostly, they've been doing online harassment tutorials. They have like a boot camp. And now we were having a conversation about how to apply that to all the epidemiologists who've suddenly become Twitter superstars. I know too whose accounts went from like 200 to over 150,000 or 200,000 in a matter of weeks and months. But when you're thrust into that arena and on climate, of course, it comes with the downside of social media is enormous. You get swarmed and trolled and things happen.
And my one piece of advice that I've taken out from all of this is don't engage, unless there's somebody who's kind of high profile and, knows what they're talking about. Don't engage with these people who throw stuff at you. It's not worth your time.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to show a couple of your pieces here. Just hold on a second. Here was one on the long history of from tobacco through carbon, of selling, doubt, and the like. How do you come up with your ideas? When you're forming an approach, an attack?
This was kind of personal to me because my dad smoked almost every day of his life, and it eventually killed him. But I remember growing up in this household where you're getting all the news. We had the TV news on, we had newspapers, we had magazines. And the tobacco industry was denying a link between tobacco and cancer, which looks to us as absurd. And actually, some of the same people who put together that ad campaign, that massive lies, they're the ones who are also doing climate denial now. The very same people. It doesn't cause any harm, blah, blah, blah. No, it is climate harm. Climate change is changing the planet, and it's hurting us. It's deadly. It's kind of like a planetary cancer. So that's where that came from.
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward concept. Let's see here. Oh, here's more on the same issues. This is when the Exxon new revelations came out, as far as I can see.
Yeah, in 1978, Exxon scientists told company executives, global warming is real. It's caused by humans. It's going to be a global disaster. And so here you are in the boardroom. They're saying they were faced with a choice. Save the planet. We should tell the public. Focus on clean energy. Let's rally support in Congress. Or they could lie their asses off. The public can't know. Well, we'll hire tobacco lobbyists to create bogus studies. We'll rally support in Congress. The end. So we had a choice, and of course they took the one that was all about money.
Yeah. We all have a choice, and it's good. And now the consequences, of course, are coming due. There's so many. It's such a target-rich environment in some ways. How do you narrow your choices sometimes when you're thinking about this?
Well, I mean, it used to be that at the end of summer, you'd have a hard time coming up with subjects because everybody's on vacation. But, with Trump in office, there's just no end of material. From the time that I would leave the house to arrive in the office, I would get there and I'd say, what has happened? What's happened so far? In the 20 minutes it took me to get here, what has happened? There's always something.
Yeah. Especially more than ever right now, as I said earlier, introducing the episode, we're in an age of layered, simultaneous, turbulent
crises,
dynamics, crises that are all interlaced as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're in the Southwest, and have you dealt much with the wildfire issue, or, sort of, we have the political scale of inertia, what Trump or Exxon is doing or not doing, and then there's communities, building in harm's way or not paying attention to the risks around us. Is that something you've got dived in on?
Currently a fire in one of the canyons off of Salt Lake City, Neff's Canyon, and it's hard to get to, inaccessible. So they were just going to kind of let it burn itself out. But the valley is just filled with smoke. And I was in Reno a couple of weeks ago, and you couldn't see the mountains, across the way. It was that bad. And it's the entire West that is being affected by this. And I've got breathing issues, and it affects me. I can definitely feel it.
So, Karen, getting back to your arena, when you think, like, you've done so many books. Let's see, I'm going to go back to your website here in a second. That's not your website. That's a very good-looking cartoonist. Well, hold on. I'm going to switch the view here. See, I'm my own producer. It's not like there's someone in a room with screens going there. Go there. But Karen, how do you pick your subjects? It's so wonderful that NSF has, for so long, I think it's over 25 years, there's been the Artists in Antarctica option. I remember the reason I never did it was you had to commit to a pretty big chunk of time and do that training and stuff. But other than those opportunities, what else? How do you kind of choose and narrow your choices?
It's really what chases me down. I'm always talking to kids about, you go out into the world and something happens to you during the day. What's the thing that you want to come home and say, oh, you should have seen? That's the thing that I try to write about. That's the thing that I try to convey to people. It's a little bit of a nerd alert. It's because that is what jazzes me up. What jazzes me might not jazz you, but it's what I come home and want to write about. And then sometimes you do get started on something and it doesn't really go anywhere and you have to, circular file it. But if I can sustain something, whether it's a show about a puppet show or something crazy that other people might not be interested in. If I can tell a decent story, then I can keep on going with it. Doesn't always work.
That, what you just said, that when you find yourself telling someone something, did you hear that? ... That when I think back to my own journey, that's a pretty clear part of what I've tried to remember when I teach. I try to get young people particularly to think about the things that they just can't not share with others. As a guide, not only to an interesting story, but to what really catches your own passion. I think that's really good advice.
But
me,
I love.
Sorry, yeah, Pat.
I love what Karen said about you try something that's not working and you have to kind of move on, and that's so hard. It's your baby, but it's not working, so you have to just keep going, and the next one's going to be better, and it's all because you tried that first time.
Yeah.
Fail better. Yeah.
Failing forward, as they say. And Karen, where have you not gone that you dream of going?
Svalbard. I have been to the Pacific and then on up to the Bering Strait and into the Beaufort Sea and the Chukchi Sea around Alaska. I would really like to see Greenland, Svalbard, Iceland, that area. I'd like to see other parts of Antarctica too. I just had a very little taste a gorgeous little taste, but I just, once the ice is there, you want to keep going back. You know that, Andy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I've been to the Arctic 4 times and
Yeah.
To Svalbard,
Oh.
and the North Pole. And it's all unforgettable. And I actually, I grew up total tropic-phile, if that's a word. I grew up reading Swiss Family Robinson, and it was all coral reefs and
Right.
tropical mountains. And I went to the Amazon, wrote my book about Chico Mendes, and I love coral reefs. But then the first time I got to go to the Arctic, it was to the North Pole with scientists, and landing on the sea ice, which is moving under your feet because you're in the middle of an ocean, camping for several days with scientists who include divers who have to go through a hole they've melted in the ice to get to the water, was enthralling and hypnotic. There's the scale and it's the one place I've been on the planet where you wake up and you just know you're on a planet. You're not like in a place. There's just no other places I've been there like that. And Pat, do you do you travel? Like, do you find, does your drawing draw on things you see, or is it a lot of it in here too? Obviously, for the politics, you're sort of immersed in the ideas more than seeing things. But does that play a role?
Oh yeah, I mean, so when I talk to kids and tell them how to be a good cartoonist and what you should do, is you should definitely absorb as much information as you can, and that's reading, doing good documentaries, because when you're doing a cartoon, you kind of rifle through all that stuff that you've accumulated over the years. So definitely knowing a lot of stuff helps. Oh, by the way, about the Arctic, one of the best books I've ever read is called Arctic Grail. Is that the name of the book?
Oh, I think I know that. Yeah.
No, I don't.
Yeah, but if you can get a hold of it, it's got great stories, and it is an amazing story of the Arctic. But I've got one question for you guys. When is the first ship going to make it to the North Pole?
Oh, they already have. It's the Russian icebreakers. They do it routinely because they could just crash through the ice even when it's not there. If you're talking about commercial shipping, I wrote quite a bit about this. Starting over, I did a piece for my daughter's blog at the Times, at least a decade ago, called "Arctic Shipping Gets Boring," because essentially it was becoming routine. So there's a cartoon for you. Where it's not even, the drama is not even there. This is an issue with journalism generally when things, when the same story is emerging year after year after year, you lose the drama, and it ends up being, there's this body of understanding of behavioral science called shifting baselines of perception, where the thing that looked jarring becomes the norm. And then you're kind of like, you lose the sense of what's happening. And that's a real issue.
Oh yeah.
You should ask each other questions too. I'd love to have this be a conversation. So, Pat, you clearly have an inquiring mind.
Well, thank you. So the premise of the Arctic Grail was that they were trying to find the Northwest Passage, and this is back in the days of wooden boats, and it was impossible. It just wasn't going to happen. But because of global warming, climate change, like I say, it's becoming normal. I mean, that's going to be a shipping route, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I'll just show you one thing I wrote that. Here, whoops. Yeah, the Lord Franklin was the famous.
Yes.
Actually, he was. He went to the Arctic 3 times and only came back twice, which is not what you want to do. He was famed for being, he was called the man who ate his boots. The second time he went to the Arctic, he became sort of this heroic figure in British lore as having survived really tough excursions and stuff. But then, of course, things went sour.
They're still trying to find him. They're still hoping that they can find him as things thaw up there.
They have found the boat. I wrote about
Uberus?
Did they?
Yeah, there were two.
There was the Uberus vessels, and the Terror.
Here we go. They found them in 2016. There's a journalist who's written a ton about this. So yes, it's the story is still murky in the sense that how much of it was were they toxified by the lead in the tin cans, or they what was the, what, or did they just come unraveled? Because it was a really slow kind of last little trail of stuff that they left. It wasn't like they just sank and drowned.
So one of the
Sad
things that
story.
stuck with me is that the officers would sit in the longboats as the crew pulled them over the ice, pulled them over land, because they weren't supposed to. Oh, the other thing is they wore wool because they weren't supposed to be native, right?
I know.
So they did everything wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a great story.
So many great stories. Hold on, I want to just open up one more thing here. Antarctic. So Karen, you maintain the Antarctic log. That's still going actively, right?
Yes, every week.
Wow. And it's the hashtag. I assume the easiest way to find it is through just going on Google. And here I've just I showed how easy it is to find you, both of you. If anyone watching, if you just want to find more of their work, just type in the name Pat Bagley and anything, climate, COVID, you'd find his cartoons. And for you, Karen Romano Young, and an Antarctic log, you see an enormous body of work you've done, which is really cool.
And the stuff is great. Your stuff is wonderful.
Thank you very much. It's it started off to be Antarctic, but then pretty soon when you study Antarctica, you realize that there's nothing else going on but climate change. And so it started to be climate change research wherever it was happening, the Arctic, the coral reefs, Texas, wherever. And also just because I'm conscious of having a lot of young people looking, a look at the activism and policy associated with climate change.
And I know you've been very focused on the role of women in polar science too. I'm highlighting one particular image you wrote.
Yeah, this was the first 6 women scientists who reached the South Pole. And one of the things that I love about them is that when they got off the LC-130, the transport plane that brought them in, they got off arm in arm so no one could claim to be first. They're all first. Love that. Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that men would do the same thing, but somehow I have my doubts. They'd all race out the door, elbowing each other.
History does not bear that up, no.
Wow.
Pat, I would love to ask a question because I just wonder what it's like to hear from the audience about your cartoons. Do you get big roars of approval or disapproval at different times? What's the buzz? What happens?
So it's I hear generally positive stuff about my cartoons, and occasionally, through email, through Facebook, Twitter, people take exception to what I do. That's fine. We got the First Amendment. But occasionally something will just blow up, and for all the wrong reasons. I did a cartoon a couple weeks ago about police violence, and I spent a lot of time working on this cartoon to make sure that I said that police violence, white supremacy was an issue in policing. But not all police are white supremacists. I was trying to make that very clear. But I did the cartoon and I knew it was going to be controversial. And of course, people misunderstood it. Not everybody, but certain police organizations came out with statements about, how I was saying that all police are racist when actually the cartoon doesn't say that at all. So occasionally it kind of blows up in your face. But that comes with the territory. I've been doing this for a long time and I kind of know what to expect. So it happens.
And does that, do you find, this is one of the challenges I try to explore a lot amid all the toxicity and simplistic attacks on social media. Have you found methods for using it, flipping things around, as opposed to the old days? If you did a cartoon like that, you'd get a letter to the editor and that would be it. Have you been able to flip the conversation, or does it stay brittle and so the haters stay haters?
So when this cartoon came out, the Utah Peace Officers Association didn't condemn me. They said, well, what was on your mind? And they gave me an opportunity, a platform to post what I was thinking and what I meant to say. And so we engaged, and that turned into a good thing. I'm going to be going to a police training program that's open to the public that tries to explain things from their point of view. And so, they heard what I had to say, and I'm going to be hearing what they have to say, and I've got questions, and this is a good thing.
So that feels really promising to me, and I do think the arts can, like just thinking back to that work I showed at the beginning of the COVID-19 doctor, showing that invisible world, his view of something that was unbelievable, unfolding in real time. Maybe there's some way to engage actively. I'm just thinking out loud, trying to think, next steps for the work either of you do, to like when if you're going to a training process like that, where you're actively sort of doodling it as you're going.
I've been thinking about, what if I get COVID? That'd be a great opportunity to draw about the disease. But I don't think anybody really wants to do that. And there have been a few cartoonists who have experienced it and have done kind of a day by day, blow by blow, what it's like to actually have COVID. And it's incredibly instructional. It's good to look that stuff up. I actually didn't see this one by the doctor. I didn't know that that's out there. I'm going to look that up as soon as I finish here. It looks amazing.
I was thinking not so much about COVID-19, but I mean taking that approach where, like, if you go to a police training process or you're spending time there, like a reporter would be taking notes, or a blogger would be blogging. Can that result in more of an open journal approach to some of your cartooning? Have you ever done like a cartoon that's like okay, for the next 2 days I'm doing a journey, a set of cartoons? Or I'm just thinking, like, is there a next step or
yeah?
Or
first of all, I'll be taking a sketchbook to this police training thing, but I occasionally do something kind of breaking the mold and do something different. So I did a series of cartoons of anti-fascists back about 5 or 6 months ago. And of course, there's George Orwell, and I brought up some other people who are anti-fascists because that's what they describe themselves as being.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking here right now. Yeah, I'm going to throw some of that on the screen. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and it got a good reaction because people just weren't aware. Okay, there's George Orwell. He says,
right.
In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act.
Right.
And he went to Spain during the Spanish Civil War and wrote about it. And here's another anti-fascist. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Woody Guthrie. And actually, Pete Seeger, my friend Pete Seeger, had on his banjo, this machine kills fascists, or like.
Yeah, he wrote this on his guitar. This machine kills fascists.
Right. It's
and there's a woman here, if you can get to her, Virginia Cowles, again, somebody an amazing person, and she wrote about anti-fascism, about the spread of fascism in Europe during the 1930s. She was a journalist, and she actually interviewed Mussolini. She got to meet Hitler. There were actually British fascists that she was familiar with. And it's an amazing book, even now. Even now, it's frightening. But the book was called Looking for Trouble. I definitely do that book.
Wow. I'll tweet about that later.
Okay.
I love this because of the accessibility of it, because I think it opens doors to, I think different people are going to be reading this than might be reading an op-ed. Do you find that with your audience?
I mean, there was that cartoonist Thomas Nast who he brought down a political organization, and the guy who was the head of the organization said, I don't care what you people write in the newspaper, my constituents can't read, but they can't help but see those cartoons.
Right.
It is more accessible.
Going back through time, do you have favorites do you have people whose work you worship? This was a cartoon that I've used to describe my experience as a blogger. sometimes. But this goes back to, I think it was Grover Cleveland. Yeah, navigating.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
a particular event he was in the middle of. But to me, it struck me as really powerful example of what it feels like to be. But I didn't know.
Graphically, it's beautiful. I mean, this is such a
Oh, yeah.
great composition, great drawings. Yeah.
Whoop. Uh-oh, that didn't look good. Are you okay? We have lost Pat for the moment.
Got a little excited.
Yeah, I know. That's great. Everything okay?
Right?
Did you spill any ink?
I'm good.
Okay. And Karen,
excited.
you know what? I want to ask you about current. I'm going to ask you guys about current peers and people who excite you too now. But Karen, did you have inspiration, either as a kid or as you got into this, people whose work you embraced?
Yeah, well, I never expected to do anything myself, cartoon-wise, comic-wise, although I always was a doodler. But my dad and I read the funnies every Sunday. And there were ones that he loved that I didn't, and vice versa, and we would argue them, and debate them. We still do. Pearls Before Swine is his favorite. But I loved Doonesbury. I read it cover to cover, everything. Charles Schultz also. And as I got older, Alison Bechdel and Linda Barry have had a big impact on me for their emotional content. And their ability to convey, again, a difficult story, and to draw you into topics with a level of detail that you might not get involved in if it was only in text. And I just that keeps on being the theme that I find, is that this sort of work opens doors to people who might not pay attention to it otherwise, and that creates a great opportunity.
So it really is. I've tried to, when I've been teaching, I used to teach a course called Blogging a Better Planet at Pace University. And so often it was about what do you want to get done?
Yeah.
Who do you need to reach to get that thing done? Then what is the mechanism or means or platform or approach that is most likely to reach those people? And often it's not words on paper, right? It could be all kinds of things, including a kind of event, as opposed to a particular way of telling a story. I want to show something that Joanne McGarry, who's a frequent commenter and watcher here, pointed me to the fact that in Bosnia in the 90s, the Superman comics helped to spread the word about landmine risk.
Oh, wow.
No.
So it's kind of another approach where a certain media can actually be used to lessen a risk. And that's reminding me of some other examples of that as well. So it seems like a limitless range of possibilities. And that's what excites me every day here. Thinking about the key to this webcast now is how to propagate these skills. Not everyone's going to be a 40-year veteran editorial cartoonist or a multi-book children's book author. But if we could think of a way to advance both of your practices a little bit, what comes to mind? So Pat, it sounds like you do some either speaking or you've talked to kids, trained kids.
Yeah, I mean, not so much these days, but I used to go out all the time and talk to elementary schools and high schools, and actually there's a question on the AP test, I think, getting into college, where they show a political cartoon and they want you to explain what's going on, because cartoons are a way to teach critical thinking. And so, yeah.
Because you have to distill things down?
Yes. I mean, I remember sitting with my father and looking at the cartoon and trying to figure out what is going on here. And I would bug him, he just wanted to read his paper, but I'd say, well, what does that mean? Who's that person? What does that mean? And that went a lot way to teaching me how to think about things critically and also symbolically.
Yeah, there you go. It's that distillation. What am I actually looking at, or what's the core issue?
Oh yeah.
Do you find, does that come through in your drafts, like when you're drafting a cartoon?
I mean, sometimes you're going this way and all of a sudden you take a right turn, left turn. throw people off. Early on during the pandemic, I did a cartoon saying, wash your hands for 30 seconds, social distancing. There was one other thing. And the other thing to protect yourself from being infected was turn off Fox News.
Yeah. Hold on one second. Just want to show one more thing. I'll show that in a minute. So, and the same question for you, Karen. I think it's pretty clear you interact a lot with young people, and
I do. Yeah. I just as a children's book author, we often go into schools and talk about writing and talk about the decisions that you make as an artist and all of that kind of thing. But I also am really interested in another audience. Early on, when I was involved with science communications, I heard a group of scientists speak to journalists, and it was literally all day long. They just all came in and gave us their PowerPoints, one after the other. And their focus was really to get across the key points of their science so that we could go off and write about it. And then this one guy, this biologist named Chris Reddy at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, came along and he said, it doesn't matter if my Uncle Joe doesn't understand what I'm talking about. And that hit me because I recognized that a lot of people look at my work and say, oh, this is very appropriate for children, but I actually have more adults reading it than children at many junctures. It is available to schools, and yet I get a lot of people saying, I didn't understand that, or I didn't know what the impact, a couple of weeks ago, they found a cave bear that had been thawed out of the permafrost up in Canada. And they, this was big news that this bear had been found completely intact with its nose and all its organs and its fur, everything. Why should we care? And a lot of people came back to me after I wrote after I created the comic about that to say, I get it now. It's all about the permafrost and it's all about climate change and it's revealing these interesting things. Yeah. But to make something accessible visually, as you do and as I try to, means that as soon as you look at that page, you know what it's about without having to read a word, and that just drags you in. Then you want to know more and you get the rest of it. And then to have something, I think, that creates a aha kind of response like yours does, so the emotional connection also, I think you're just hitting all the bases.
Well, I mean, what I try to do in political cartoons is you want to educate people. You want to persuade people, and the last thing you want to do is entertain. Entertaining is important, but you want to inform, educate. That's the whole purpose of the cartoon.
Yeah.
Although Randy Olson, who's this? He wrote that book, "Don't Be Such a Scientist." He's a former marine biologist who became a filmmaker, and he would actually flip what you just said around. He would say, "Go with the gut is the first thing."
Oh,
and then the education and all that comes afterwards.
That is the hook. That's true.
Yeah. I did want to find this one other example of sort of a utilitarian approach to cartooning from a scientist, Roger Billum, who's a famed seismologist and earthquake risk guy in Boulder, University of Colorado. He told me once, and I wrote about this, in the Himalayas, they're just deeply concerned about the next earthquakes. The one that hit Kathmandu is not even remotely the worst that can happen. And among other things, he worked with Rebecca Bendick on posters that do this distillation thing you guys were talking about, which is, here's a very simple way without words, really. There are words still that say, if you want to build a building that falls down, do what the X says. Mix too much sand with your cement. And it even shows right here, you can see those are the rebar, the iron rods that go into a column. And if you think you're just building a building, you put up those vertical rods that's going to hold together when the building starts to shake. You're wrong. But over here, you have these little circles of iron, then make that sort of it's like spaghetti with string around it. It's much stronger if you tie the spaghetti together.
Yeah.
And fewer bags of sand with your cement can lead to a safer outcome. So it's like, and have they worked? We don't know. This is that testing. But iterate, listen, learn part of what you're talking about.
The image is something that stays with you. people look at it and they remember that.
Yeah, hopefully. So I just found here's a video of you sort of getting through the process again. I think it's worth seeing an example of this. I don't know if you remember, this was 2017 or so, but you have the idea, you sketch, you iterate. This was, I think, related to bottled water. Oh, no, it was water.
Hmm.
But it's interesting to see. Are there methods that you prefer to use? Like we didn't talk yet about the digital age and the pen and paper. You both still work on paper, I think, or
no?
not?
This is one of the last times that I worked on paper. I work on my iPad through Procreate, and it's where I can go back and I can make corrections. And but I'm looking at this cartoon. It looks like there's a little bit of COVID virus up in the top. Wow, what's that all about? I don't know.
So this was the whole Flint, Michigan issue.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So that's interesting. So now that you're able to use a digital tool, it takes away a little bit of that stress about the blank paper and then having to start all over again.
Yeah, definitely. And the pressure that you can put on it, it's almost it is like paper. It is that good.
Wow.
But I do have friends who are purists and they want to stick with paper and pen and ink, and their stuff is great, But it's like, Karen, I admire you. What you do is
Thank
tricky.
you. I start on paper and pen, but I go pretty quickly to Photoshop, and I do a lot. I do a lot in that, and I do a lot of different layering everything in Photoshop, and shifting things around and figuring out my layouts and all that kind of stuff. That's always a part of it. I'm very interested in your process though, and I think that it's really something that I would love to be playing with.
Well, you can stay in touch. I encourage it. Joanne McGarry, who's out in the redwoods in California, where they've had so much trouble with fire lately, is a frequent commenter here, and she's asking about Story of Stuff, which was a pretty interesting early animated version of Consumption. I don't know if either of you are familiar with it. And RSA Animate. Any thoughts? So don't worry if it's not something you're familiar with, but she was just asking.
I'm not sure precisely what either of those is, but I have thought a lot about animating doodles. And these are I think that Story of Stuff is one of those things where it sort of creates itself on the page, where you see the drawing appearing without seeing the person, and then it just fills in all of the different concepts.
Right.
And by the time you get to the end, it's this whole big poster that shows the whole process. And I think it's fabulous. I think that it's had a big impact on people's understanding of things and learning. And it's the kind of thing I love to look at while I'm hearing something new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's...
there you go.
Yeah, she ended up at Greenpeace much later. She's done a lot of this kind of work. And I guess this has become a fairly common thing now with animated videos, where the sort of drawing the video. Actually, sorry, Pat.
There's Robert Reich, who was Clinton's labor secretary, who also happens to be a cartoonist, and he will explain.
Actually, Joanne mentioned Robert. She says, "Are you a fan of Robert Reich's drawing?"
There you go. And he will explain through cartoons, what's going on. And his stuff is really good.
I'll look that up too.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I've seen, I'm not sure if you've been to conferences where there's an artist in residence who's kind of doing there's a big blank board at the beginning of the meeting, and then it's filled in with sort of the story of the conference. That's a whole nother arena that's emerged too. Karen, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, there's a woman named Sunny Brown, I think her name is, who does a lot of that, and who talks about why it helps, because it really is very interesting. She's not just listening, she's really distilling it into a format and and a diagram that you can really see the relationships between things as she goes along. It's quite a skill.
It is. I've seen some remarkable examples. People able to do that, and it actually does bring together the ideas. And it does a little bit of what I think it was Pat who was talking about, that distillation process.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that person is listening deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
the people who do this really well, and they're kind of capturing some of those core ideas.
Yeah, Karen said at the beginning of this that she will start at the top and not necessarily know where it's going to go, but as you build it, it takes you in a direction and you kind of figure things out. And sometimes it surprises you just how good it is, right?
It's really cool. Well, it's great to have you both here today, and I feel like I'll say it, we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
It might be fun to do an active. Maybe I'll bring in. There might be a way to do a little mini class around this sometime. It'd be kind of fun.
That would be really fun.
From the different perspectives. And there are other people. I was going to ask you both the last question about who out there right now. Well, you mentioned Karen Sunny Brown for those conference artworks, but in your fields, like who else is doing work that's akin to what you do that you really want to draw attention to?
I'd say Molly Crabapple is doing a lot of stuff about social justice. And she does a lot of this thing you were talking about where she you can see her actually doing the drawing and filling it in. And it does draw you in, and she's great. Molly Crabapple.
I'm going to pull that up right now. Here we go. The power of Google. Is this her?
That's her. Yeah, definitely.
Wow. Well,
wow.
Yeah, this looks very powerful, and it has a very strong presence. I guess that's something you develop over time, is your own sort of. There's a feel to each artist, each cartoonist.
Well, she's an activist who actually talks to people. I think she's been to Syria. I don't want to say, I'm not 100% sure, but she goes to these places and she talks to the people, and she makes us aware of stuff that is kind of uncomfortable, but her stuff is great. It's amazing.
I'll try to get her on one of these shows. These are
good idea.
Stunning work.
Yeah, really.
Wow.
For me, there are two. One is Wendy McNaughton. She illustrated Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. She also does comics in the New York Times and in different places that are always kind of a story about something that she's discovered just walking around. I love her take on people. She writes a lot about people and does it in this visual way that I find really appealing.
And here we have her.
That's Wendy. Yeah.
Wow. Very interesting. There's some synchronicity there with the last work.
Yeah. And there's another one. Look at her. Yeah, it's just great.
Wow.
I just look and I see her influence on me too.
That's good.
Yeah.
No, that's
another
great.
is Rosemary Mosco, Mosco, who does a comic called Bird and Moon. That is just a very simple nature comic. She does a lot of birds. Last year, all summer long, she drew every snake in North America. Yeah.
Wow.
And she kind of has them talk and tell little tidbits about themselves, and charming, and it brings people along in a nice way. It's very easy and sweet and simple.
Well, I think you've both brought people along in a nice way that's sweet and simple, and I think leading to some new ways to thrive online today. So thanks for being part of this show. I want to show where we're going next here. So on Mondays are Thriving Online. There's sessions on skills to spread and think about in advance. And Wednesdays are policy. We're going to have Joel Cohen on, who a long time ago wrote a famous book called How Many People Can Earth Support? Very simple question, very hard to answer. And we're heading toward 9 billion by mid-century. What happens after that is is really tough to challenge, to identify, but that doesn't mean you don't do anything about population. So, and Katindi CV Njonjo is a futurist in Nairobi, and we'll be talking with them about this issue of, especially in the context of a pandemic and global warming, what do you do to foster the best possible outcomes for the species called Homo sapiens? If we can live up to that sapien part of it, that would be wonderful to think. And so again, it's been great today to have Pat Bagley, long timer at the Salt Lake City Tribune here, and editorial cartoonist of the year, and to have Karen Romano Young. Follow her Antarctic log hashtag, wherever you, and you can find her work everywhere. And her books are fantastic, so check them out. And that's it for today's edition of Sustain What. Sustain What is a global online conversation identifying solutions to the complicated, shape-shifting, and epic challenges of humanity's great acceleration. That's the last 60 years of Zoom mode we've been on. And of course, now we're in the midst of what some are calling the great pause inflicted by this virus that we allowed to spread pretty much unchecked for too long. And now it's going to be very hard to tamp out. Prime focus of this enterprise here that I'm running is making sense of and getting the most out of the planet's fast forward information environment, the one Earth system changing faster than the actual environment. Think about if we had tried to have this conversation 5 or 10 years ago, how different that would be. Mm-hmm. The webcast is produced as part of my work building Columbia University's new Earth Institute initiative on communication and sustainability. How do you make information and connection matter on a noisy, fractious planet? As soon as we're done, share the link you've been watching with friends in circles far and wide, and look at the little scrolling bar at the bottom that's been probably bothering you off and on for information on how to reach me about future episodes. And I can see already some future episodes just deriving from the conversation we had today. So thanks again, Pat and Karen, and stay well wherever you are. Connect with people from a distance as you're doing, and onward we go.
Thanks, Andy, and it's so good to meet you, Karen.
You too, Pat. Thank you, Andy. It's been an honor.
Well, thanks. It's an honor for me too.